You're listening to Sustainably Geeky, the podcast for everyday environmentalists.
Hi, you're listening to Sustainably Geeky. This is episode 55, and today we're going to be talking about mining and extractivism. And I'm excited to be talking with V'cenza Cirefice. She is a researcher, activist, and artist from Northern Ireland who is interested in anti or post extractivism, gender, and environmental justice. Vincenza, thank you so much for being here. We actually met through my graduate program at NUI Galway in not Southern Ireland, but Republic of Ireland. So I appreciate you taking the time to share what you've already talked with me a lot about. And could you kind of start by just telling us what led you to this line of work and your experiences in researching and working with the communities affected by extractivism?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me on. Yeah, I guess I always kind of like start with like going way back. I've always kind of been interested in the environment and ecological kind of ways of living. I grew up on kind of a small kind of sustainable farm, so my family was kind of thinking that way, really. But it was really whenever I was in like sixth form of high school, so like the last 2 years of high school, that I got involved with the campaign in solidarity with people in the Niger Delta who were resisting oil extraction by Shell. And I suppose that was kind of like my first time thinking about those connections between environmentalism and human rights and social justice as well. So it was kind of like a big moment in how I think about all of these things. And that, yeah, that really kind of inspired me to follow this kind of track. And I went to uni and I studied kind of these topics in human geography and anthropology. And I was really involved in activism at that time as well. So I was really involved in like the climate justice movement in the UK, which really influenced the way I think about these things as well. Yeah, and then after uni, I was kind of I worked for a few different environmental social justice NGOs and collectives. And then I started my PhD in 2019 back at NUIG where we met. And I was looking at, and I am still looking at, communities resisting a big gold mine in the north of Ireland, in the Sperrin Mountains. And I suppose, yeah, I was also really interested in this topic because before I came to start my PhD, I was living and working in Cyprus with a small environmental NGO, and we were accompanying communities that were resisting gold mining over there as well. So I kind of saw what was happening there and saw what was happening back home. And it is such a global story, you know, you see the same tactics and the same sort of patterns playing out all over the world. But obviously they're very different in these different contexts. So that would be interesting to explore that. So that's kind of what led me to the research that I'm doing now.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I first met you, I think you were a guest speaking in one of our courses about your experiences with extractivism, and you had us read an article about resistance in, I think it was Norway or one of those countries, and it referenced a lot of the work in the Sparins, and I honestly was like, I had no idea that there was extraction still being done to that extent in
Mhm.
European countries, Northern European countries, and that there was such heavy resistance. And, I felt embarrassed, one, for my ignorance, but also it did make me realize, like you said, what a global issue this is and how people from every part of the world, whether you're, way up north herding reindeer or you're, in the Amazon resisting anything, any kind of extraction logging. It's amazing how this can connect people, and you've actually done a lot of work with other communities around the world. Would you mind just speaking to some of that real quick, because I know you just recently had hosted some people from the Americas, and did an amazing program with them as well.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think, yeah, because it is such a global story, like actually linking up in solidarity with other frontline communities is so important and so strong. And I think that's what makes resistance movements so strong. So yeah, we've been really lucky, like in the work I've been doing, kind of as an activist researcher, has been a lot of like setting up exchanges with communities and resistance around the world, and the community in the Sperrins is doing that so well. Like they've linked up with like communities in like so many countries. I can't even list them all. Like it's so huge, like Honduras, Indonesia, Norway, Sweden, Spain, Turkey, Greece, Canada, the US, like all over. So that's been really inspiring to me as well. But yeah, so like two of the big projects that I was lucky to be involved in organizing through my PhD and through my involvement in the campaign. The first one was we had the Zapatistas who came from Mexico in October last year. So that was a year ago. It's hard to believe, but that was a really inspirational visit. We had a delegation of 7 really young Zapatista women who came and shared their story with the community, and we had a lot of like community sharing events and eating together and yeah, experiencing each other's cultures and things. And then in the summertime, we had a visit by water protectors from Dakota who were involved in the Standing Rock protests. And that was actually meant to be a much bigger visit, but unfortunately, because of COVID, we had to scale that back. But we're hoping that it will take place before June this year. And that collective that we're organizing in is called Making Relatives. So it's really about kind of like, yeah, questioning the way we see the world and yeah, making relatives with each other and the more than human world again. So that was lovely. We had Emma Minks, who's a water protector from Dakota, came over, and then we also had an activist from Chile called Ramon come over as well, who works with the Yes to Life Noda Mining Network. So yeah, it was great. We had 2 weeks full of activities and visits and events and walks and all kinds of things. So it was great to connect with them.
Yeah, I think events like that and forming those bonds is great for like you said, just building solidarity and knowing that we're not alone in this. Because a lot of times I think people can feel isolated when they're resisting
Totally.
whatever environmental thing is happening in their
Mm-hmm.
community, and knowing that others have done it before, have been successful, or have learned lessons the hard way that they can teach. And also I think it kind of shows the man or whoever we want to say that we're fighting, that we are actually bigger than they want us to believe, because I think they like to make us think that we're small pockets that can't do much, and together we can.
Oh,
So
yeah, totally, totally. And you see, that's how they delegitimize movements as well, that they're just these like little, like NIMBY, place-based kind of, people who object to everything, but that's so like not the case in what I've seen and experienced. I think
hmm
these like rural, often very peripheralized communities, because you see mining really impact the peripheries of Europe. You see Scandinavia and Ireland and Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal are kind of like the
hmm
hotspots in this mining boom happening in Europe at the minute. So yeah, it's like these communities that are already kind of marginalized. So yeah, definitely there's so much strength in connecting up and yeah, realizing that like there's a huge network of people and we can draw so much strength and learn so much from that as well.
hmm Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I am sad that I didn't get to come to this year's event, but I'm hoping to be back in Ireland maybe next year or the next time you
Yeah,
do it. So,
hopefully you'll get over. Yeah, that would be
yeah.
lovely.
So I want to talk a little bit about your work, and I know you're still in the process of doing your research, but I've looked at some of your papers, and I know that you focus heavily on ecofeminism and feminist political ecology. So can you explain to our listener what this means and how this might differ from the more quote unquote mainstream way of looking at the world?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I guess for me, like it's a really useful frame or way of looking at the world whenever we're talking about extractivism and these sort of like big concepts, because it really looks at like power, I think, and I hope you can understand my Nordy accent when I say that, or power. I think that yeah, it's a way of thinking like much deeper about these things. So like whenever I talk about extractivism from this perspective, ecofeminist, feminist political ecology, I don't mean that like I'm just looking at the physical removal of like minerals from the earth. I'm talking about much deeper ways of knowing the world, of seeing the world, how we relate to each other, and how we relate to the more than human world, and how it's actually deeply rooted in these big, massive systems of oppression like colonialism and white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism, all of these things, these big interrelated systems. Extractivism is very much like a part of that. So for me, that's why it's really, really useful. And I suppose like at a very basic level, how I understand ecofeminism or feminist political ecology is like they try to draw connections away. Certain groups of marginalized people are treated and the environment is treated. So both those kind of categories are almost treated like the other, or something that we can objectify to extract from. So we like kind of extract from women's free unpaid care work the same way we extract from a mountain for like mining, or racialized people's labor is extracted, the same way we extract from the earth. So I think these ways of thinking are trying to draw those connections between all of those things. And I think it helps as well because it shows that we're not talking about just like a single issue. It's not just about mining or fracking or an oil pipeline. It's about, a huge range of social justice issues. It's really about bringing all of those things together, because at the root, they're all connected through those big systems. I hope that makes sense, but
Yeah, so I guess it sounds like really the way we take nature for granted or take advantage of nature historically, and I say we as in like industrialized,
sure. Yeah.
kind of Eurocentric societies tend to kind of just like you said, say nature is there for the taking. It's there for us to use, and we don't have to give anything back.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's kind of the mindset that we also apply towards these marginalized groups like care workers and other
Totally.
races and et cetera, et cetera. So, um,
Totally. Yeah, yeah. And as well, like they say it's very much, this enlightenment time, whenever you see the rise of the industrial revolution and the scientific revolution, and we start to see this real like Eurocentric way of thinking about the world come in, like they really like critique that and say that's where our current crisis has its roots, because we start to see nature as external from us and kind of just something that's out there, that we can use for our own needs or whatever, rather than seeing us as part of it, as like, yeah, we are nature as well, So I think they're
yeah.
trying to like reweave that kind of divide that's been really damaging in a whole load of ways.
hmm So it sounds like the resistance to mining and extraction and all these harmful activities to nature in general um, is more than just you're polluting the water or you're making people sick. It's really like this is saying that it's part of a larger problem where um, it's not just that one instance. It's happening all over the world, and we need to rethink how we treat nature in general so that we don't just keep repeating this cycle.
Totally, yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it's part of like a much bigger story, of like, yeah, extractivism, I think can mean, yeah, like mining, but it can also mean like we can have extractive relations between people as well, when we like, even in research, yeah, you can like, use communities to like further your career, if you just kind of
hmm
like bomb in and do a few interviews and then like leave again, so I think that's something I've been really mindful of throughout my process of doing the PhD is, how do we do non-extractive research as well,
Yeah.
how do we build connections and relationships and make sure that our research is useful for the communities we work with too.
Not just taking.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there needs to be some reciprocity there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this made me wonder, since this is all kind of based on this economic model that does take nature as a resource for granted, what are some other models that you think might work better? Or is there, something out there that has, I don't know if scientifically proven is the word, but has been put forward by other researchers as, this might actually be better for us overall?
Yeah, totally. Like, I'm really inspired by this like term post-extractivism, and that's really coming out of Latin America, the place I think that has, suffered the most from this extractive model over time, where you see this huge wealth transfer from there to like the global north, and there's lots of amazing movements and critical thinkers there that are thinking through these really big questions. And yeah, like part of that whole moving to like a world beyond extractivism means looking at different economic models, like you said, So I'm really inspired by the degrowth model as well. So that's kind of saying, that we can't just keep going with this need for constant growth because that's actually what's causing all of our interconnected crises. So we need to actually degrow in the global north. So like consume less and so we're able to redistribute the wealth that's in the world and the resources because we're living in such an unequal time, but there's also, concepts like buen vivir as well, which means like living well or like the good life, which kind of focuses on social and ecological well-being rather than GDP. And I think that's really inspiring as well. Um, and then there's also the rights of nature movement, which I think is very inspirational. And I know that the movements in Ireland have been using that really strongly at the minute. So it's kind of the idea of giving legal rights to non-human nature. So like almost like the way corporations have personhood in the law. So like a river could have personhood, or a mountain, or like a bog landscape or something like that, So that like yeah, it's sort of like redefining how we sort of relate to the world and see the world as well. So yeah, I think there's lots of different examples out there, and I think there's loads of different alternatives, and I think that resistance movements really show us that there there are lots of different ways of relating to each other and being in the world. And yeah, I think that that's really inspirational and what we really need to focus on as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a world without capitalism, right? I mean, that's kind of been the main economic mindset for so many years, and
Yeah. Mhm.
um, yeah, it's like bringing these things up is almost taboo. But like you said, we have caused so much damage, and just like thinking about the earth only has so much resources. So
Totally.
it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not like legitimately not even possible to continue consuming at this rate,
Yeah.
because we're going to run out of things to make the stuff with. There's not going to be
Yeah.
oil to make the plastic and metal to make whatever. And
Mhm.
um, especially, as the global population continues to grow and people continue to, each person consumes more and more than they did 20, 40 years ago. It's just not mathematically possible. um,
That's
and
it.
so yeah, this like focus on consumerism is really, I think, the root of a lot of the problems we're seeing, and it's really resulted in more pressure for mining and other extractive industries. So, knowing this, like, how do these activities negatively affect the surrounding environments and communities? And I guess, to build on that, you've kind of mentioned this, but what communities are affected the most by this?
Mm. Yeah, I think, yeah, definitely this um extractive mode of development. Like um yeah, it's so like pervasive, and like you say, like, we can't like physically, like we can't like, the laws of science mean we can't, just keep extracting and extracting. And you see now, like it's like such a colonial thing. It's like, oh, now we're going to go to the seabed to mine, or we're going to go to outer space, so it's like always these new frontiers looking for the last kind of, bit to extract from. And I would say, that it's really, it's like communities in the global south and indigenous communities that are like first and worst impacted by this, even though like they aren't the ones causing the problem like at all. Like under like climate justice, obviously that's, very much the narrative, which is so important. But yeah, like I said, it's also the peripheral kind of communities within the core. So like, the edges of Europe, like Ireland and Scandinavia, that are are suffering. But I think that, yeah, like um this type of industrial like mega mining, it's so damaging, like yeah, ecologically, it's hard to go into like all of the details. It's just like so mind-boggling, the amount of like heavy metals that are used in like gold extraction, for example, the leaching, um, the particles in the air that cause like so much health issues, the water pollution, oh yeah, just they go on and on. But it's also, the fact that they um impact so strongly on the communities living around the area, and you see how the communities like divide and conquer as well. So they create these huge like social divisions within communities, and like so many different like gendered impacts as well. Like, there's all these different ways that these impacts are felt based on people's identities as well. Um, and yeah, so I think that in terms of like, yeah, like like the narrative is very much like that we need all the time more and more and more, but we know we have so much resources and wealth in the world like already. And I think the question really is about like redistribution and about like, yeah, finding a fair way to find another system of how we, share that wealth and ensure like well-being within planetary boundaries. There's also the great theory, I don't know if you know that one, donut economics by Kate Rashford. It's amazing. It's like, imagine the economy like a donut. So like the outside is the like kind of like environmental limits that you don't want to exceed, and then the inside ring is like social well-being. So you obviously don't want like eco austerity where like people can't afford to, have energy or to like have a home or to go about like their livelihoods. So it's kind of like balancing those two things.
Yeah, it is hard to reconcile that, we do want a certain quality of life,
Yeah.
but not at the expense of the planet and certain communities, and
Mhm.
sacrificing, whole parts of
Totally.
the earth to have that for some people. And if you do look at, I know in the US, and this is probably the case in Europe and other parts of the world, a lot of times you'll notice where they place, industrial power plants or mining facilities or whatever, it is very close to certain communities that they consider
Totally.
marginalized or less than, like communities of color or indigenous communities or lower income communities. And that also happens to be where you see, more instances of health problems and lower educational,
Mhm.
attainment and things like that, because a lot of times those communities are written off, and um, they even, I think when a lot of the pipelines were going through, they specifically rerouted them through more affluent communities out of the way, miles and miles, so that they could go through indigenous land. And it's like, this
Mhm,
is very
mhm.
obvious what you're doing, but
Totally, yeah, it's
people,
environmental racism, isn't it? Yeah, like,
yeah.
and when you think about like the uranium mines on indigenous lands in the US and like how many like birth defects and like, like health impacts that causes and miscarriages and things, like it's
Hmm.
it's really scary. And yeah, I think in the Irish context as well, we have a lot of issues around like travelers' rights,
Hmm.
the traveling community is really treated like in horrendous ways, like, and that, they're almost like reservations. Their halting sites are always placed beside like an incinerator or a landfill dump or these kind of like big projects. So yeah, you definitely you see that everywhere. It really is a huge issue.
Hmm. And then it kind of creates the stigma that these communities are dirty or unhealthy or whatever, unsafe, because it's like a self-perpetuating thing, Okay, yeah, so we've talked about kind of who is, most affected by this stuff, but obviously, like everybody overall is going to be affected by, you know,
Totally. Hmm.
impacts, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's, if people can't get to the point where they care about others, at least they can see like this is going to affect me eventually.
Totally, yeah, totally, yeah, exactly. We live in such an interconnected world, and these like chemicals or like air particles, whatever. They're not going to respect, boundaries or borders of countries, so yeah, definitely.
Well, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to talk about, we're trying to think of creative solutions to address the climate crisis, and a lot of times that requires resource extraction, especially of like heavy metals and minerals, and those the mining of those things causes a whole other set of environmental problems while we're trying to solve the emissions problem. So we're kind of trading one set for another. So do you think that we can, balance these issues, or maybe find solutions that don't cause an increase in extraction while also, enabling us to use renewable energy or EVs or whatever the solution might be?
Yeah, totally. And I think, yeah, like I always like have to say before like I say anything on this that like I absolutely do think we need to transition to renewables. There's no question about that. It's just very much how that is done and who is impacted by that, and where the power is in all of these things and in these transitions is really, really important. And yeah, like there's a saying, that a just transition has to be a post-extractive transition as well. Because I think what's happening at the minute is that we're like, yes, we are increasing renewables, but what's happening is they're just being added on top of fossil fuel use and extraction, because we're in a system where we have this huge increase all the time in energy demand and energy use, because we're in this like constant growth kind of trajectory. So what we're like actually doing is we're not switching one for another at the moment. We're just like, we're just adding it on top to create more energy. So I
We're
think
still
what we
consuming just as much, but with a
yeah,
different power source.
exactly, yeah. So I think that we can't just switch, from fossil fuel based economy to a renewable based economy like in the current system, because it'll leave all of those like inequalities and sacrificed communities like there and untouched, like, and unquestioned. So I think, yeah, like it really is like about the system that kind of goes underneath it. And they say as well, like it's a great saying, we can't mine our way out of the climate crisis. If we want real change and real like deep transformation, like it means like adopting this like degrowth or other ways of running the economy or thinking about the economy, or like thinking about like democratically owned renewable energy, or like co-ops, community owned co-ops of renewable energy and things like that, so that the energy that we're producing is actually going to like communities' well-being and need as well. Because what we see in Ireland at the minute is, and I think that this is replicated around the world, that whenever you have this corporate capture of the transition, we see like these huge wind farms being put up around Ireland, but the energy produced there isn't going towards local communities. It's actually being used for the data centers of Amazon and Facebook and Google, which are all located in Ireland, because of the climate and lots of different things. And they're consuming huge amounts of our water. They're not paying taxes, all these kind of things. And if you want to read more on that, Patrick Bresson from Maynooth University does amazing work on that and how that's a form of extractivism. So I really recommend looking into that. So yeah, I think it really is a question of like, who's it for, and who's losing out, who's benefiting from all of these things. I think that's kind of what political ecology tries to ask the questions of. It's not so simple as switching from fossil fuels to renewables.
Yeah, it's kind of like the people who argue, well, if I continue to consume the same amount, but I'm recycling, then I'm okay because I'm recycling. And it's like, no, the whole point is to consume less and reduce the amount of resources you're using, not to turn them into something else, because recycling is imperfect as well. But I don't know, that's kind of what comes to mind for me. It's like we're still, yeah, we're shifting how we get the power, but yeah, we're not
Totally.
completely.
Yeah, it's that idea of like eco-efficiency or like ecological modernization, the idea that, we can just like tweak make these little tweaks, to the system, like, and then, but carry on with the status quo, like carry on with like increasing the need for more and more and more, but just do it in a slightly different way. I think that,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not going to cut it in our current crisis. Like the scale is so massive, and we need really, really drastic, yeah, alternatives.
Yeah, and I think a big part of the problem is people just aren't willing to give up their lifestyles, right? Like people have gotten so comfortable with
Mhm.
being able to push a button and get things auto delivered, or being able to go to the store and having 50 options of disposable whatever. And it's like, how do we shift people's behaviors and willingness to give up a little so that other people in the world can have a little better, like, I don't want to say we're living like kings and queens, in the global north, but we comparatively, we do enjoy, I think, a lot more things when you consider that half the resources we have came from the global south, and they're living in much
Yeah.
worse conditions a lot of times.
Yeah, totally. I think that, like, yeah, reflection on our lives is really important as well. But I also think, there is um like a small minority of people, even within the global north, that are consuming the most resources and are taking the most flights and are actually, like, yeah, actually really the ones that, like, we really need to change their behavior of, whether it's like, the billionaires, or even, the 1%, like this class that is really, really causing a lot of these issues. And it's not to say that we shouldn't, like, absolutely, you know um do our best in our life as well. But yeah, I think we're so almost like we're locked into this fossil fuel economy, and a lot of the time it's not like our fault. Like it really does, like, yeah, require a huge system change to allow people to make better decisions and yeah, better choices. And as well, like, we're stuck in systems where we're like, there's so much like advertising and all these things telling us to consume and telling us, that that's going to make us feel better, or, be happier. And it's not. We like have really unhappy societies, like really unequal societies as well. And I think that, yeah, actually, that this switch to like a more like non-extractive or more ecological way of living could actually like bring huge benefits in terms of like building up communities that have been like broken down and turn people into like these individual, consumers, rather than part of like a vibrant democracy and society. I think that, yeah, that we need to focus on the benefits, having more local, healthy, sustainable food systems, like that would bring huge benefits, and it would like be part of the the climate crisis solutions as well. So yeah, I think we definitely need to focus on the benefits it would bring us. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And just to go back to something you mentioned a little bit ago, I next month I'm actually going to be talking with someone who is going to speak about his research in the um, mass, consumption of
Mm,
energy by the data centers and resources.
amazing.
And they had an exhibit at the Galway Arts Festival, and it was really interesting. It's called Entanglement, and they look at kind of the amount of resources and energy. I think the statistic was like 20 or 30% of Ireland's energy output goes to these data centers now, because
Yeah.
they're so prevalent, and they're so quote unquote business friendly, but to
Yeah,
bring
yeah.
these companies in, but then they suck the grid dry, and it's going to be an interesting conversation. So
Yeah, oh, that'll be brilliant. Yeah, because they are like vampires, they are literally like, yeah, sucking the lifeblood out of
yeah.
the country, like, yeah.
Yeah, that'll be a good follow up to this, because, like you said, it is another form of extractivism,
Hmm.
kind of taking advantage of a country that's, I guess, more willing to give up its own energy independence for these other organizations. So,
Totally, yeah. And I think it's totally tied to like our like economy. Like in Ireland, North and South, it's so neoliberal, and it's so like all about attracting foreign direct investment, as a way to
mhm.
develop. Like it's so focused on that. And like, it means actively inviting in extractive industries, like with what I'm looking at mining, but whether it's data centers or like corporate wind farms, whatever. And yeah, letting them like do whatever they want, like rolling back environmental legislation, like
Hmm.
lowering taxes, whatever, to attract them in. And, like, I mean, the people's lives aren't, this type of development isn't making people's lives better,
Hmm.
it's actually like making things much, much worse.
Yeah, making it harder to find housing and driving up the cost of living and all that stuff.
Totally, yeah, yeah, it's all so interconnected, like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that'll be an interesting follow-up to this conversation, I think.
Mm.
And yeah, it's like one more example of how everything's related and how all these fights can work together. So kind of going back to your, work, and you've mentioned that one of the communities that is the most affected by these extractive industries is women or caretakers. So, can you give some examples of, how women have been resisting this destructive extraction throughout the world, and some success stories, maybe some things to give us some hope, if you have some of those as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's really interesting. Like I know there's a group mainly based in the US, but like all over the Americas called the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. And they do amazing work looking at like women's resistance to extractivism. But I think that yeah, around the world you see this kind of like dynamic where women really are on the front lines of resistance. And there's loads of different like theories on I guess why that is, but I guess I would sort of say it's because the current system is like hurting them, and they see these interconnections more readily, and in many cases like women talk about um the care for the environment being an extension of the care work that they are already doing, because a livable, healthy environment is also like what we need to live our lives. And yeah, yeah, and also like if around the world like more women are doing the care work and involved in social reproduction, so like all of the things that actually sustain societies and life, whether that's like cooking or childcare, elderly care, education, healthcare, all of these things that women do mainly for free all the time around the world. Um, they're obviously going to be the first ones to notice whenever the water becomes polluted or the children become sick, or the material reality of these projects kind of kicks home or whatever. And I suppose that does look different in every context, all around the world as well. And I think that like, yeah, I don't think we should say that women are either like the victims or the saviors of the situation, because that's quite like simplistic. I think there's like a lot of stuff going on, and I know that there's huge amounts of like people of all genders involved in these movements and doing amazing things. But yeah, I think that there is definitely a gendered element to it. And yeah, and often you see women standing up and they're also kind of like challenging patriarchal kind of cultures and norms as well, like they're like entering like the public sphere and speaking out and stepping out of maybe traditional gender roles. And there's like a lot of like sort of transformational stuff that goes on, I think, within inside resistance movements, which is really really amazing. And yeah, there's like I think there's loads of examples of like amazing stories from around, like I mean Standing Rock, for example, that was very much like youth and women led by Indigenous women and youth. And I think that's such an inspirational story as well. And yeah, and I also think about Linda Sullivan, who's an amazing earth and water defender from the north of Ireland, who I'm lucky to work with as well. She lived for years in Peru with communities resisting the Conga mine, which was a huge gold mine, one of like supposed to be one of the biggest gold mines in the world. I mean, it was like $1 billion project. It was massive, and the community resistance was so strong that they actually managed to stop it. So I think that there are these examples where these movements work and they do bring about real change. And as well, the community I worked with in Cyprus, that was very much led by two amazing young women who lived in the village, who really had to force their way into like the corridors of power and be taken seriously, and they were told constantly, oh, they're just hysterical village women, and they had to face so much misogyny and like patriarchal values and norms to even do their activism or their protection of their home and their water and their air. And they managed to stop the company as well, with a huge group of local people and connections to other NGOs and groups and collectives, all working in connection. But yeah, it was very much led again by women, and that was really inspirational to see, I think.
Yeah, they like to paint us as hysterical so that no one will listen when they
Totally,
don't like
yeah,
what we're saying.
totally. And you see that so much even with like Greta Thunberg, like the way they talk
Mhm,
about her, like as if she's like they focus on her like mental illness, and she's too loud, and
mhm,
it's like the same language that you see
yeah.
like for hundreds
Or
of
how we
years.
look or what we're wearing and, like, the things that don't
Yeah,
matter when the message is the point, yeah. So just detract
exactly.
from that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add, I thought of this as you were talking. Mary Robinson wrote a great book called Climate Justice that
That's right.
gives
Yeah.
examples of mostly female-led resistance to environmental issues, but there are a few men highlighted as well who have done some great
Yeah.
things. And she's the former president of Ireland, so she's become a big activist in this space. So if people are
Yeah.
interested in learning more about that, that's a great. It's a very
Totally.
short read too. So
Yeah, and she has an amazing podcast series as well.
yes,
I'm sure you've heard it, Mothers of Invention.
yes, I love
It's
it.
amazing. Yeah, and she interviews like a different kind of ecofeminist
Mhm.
hero, like um,
Yeah, I think it hasn't had a new season in a while, but it's her, Maeve Higgins, and another person from Ireland that I can't think of the name, but it's really funny too, and it's very feminist focused podcast, so it's a lot
yeah,
of
it's
fun.
brilliant. Yeah, really recommend.
Yeah, well, this has been a lot to think about, and great information. Is there anything else you would want to share with our listeners before we move on? Any resources you might share for folks who are looking to learn more?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot of great like activist collectives and groups that are working on this stuff, and they produce a lot of great reports and materials and documentaries, that are really accessible and like help us kind of understand these big issues. Like, so the first one would be the Yes to Life Node and Mining Network. I would really recommend checking them out. They're a global network. We Can, who I mentioned, the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, are amazing, and War on Want as well, are another group who kind of work on global justice issues, but like focus on these big questions, too. And yeah, and also, if you're interested in sort of like the ecofeminist kind of stuff within Ireland, Sinead Mercier is a wonderful ecofeminist, environmentalist, a just transition expert who's written a brilliant book called The Men Who Eat Ringforts, which is really fascinating and kind of taps into all of these kind of like deeper questions about how we see the world and how can we move to sort of like a decolonial environmentalism in Ireland, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah, those are great resources. And I actually meant to ask you, do you have any advice you would offer folks looking to get involved in opposing these extractive activities, either locally or globally, other than obviously looking into some of these organizations? Any best practices or just things you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I suppose it's one of the things that I kind of like learned from the Zapatista movement, and they call it bringing Zapatismo home, because I guess a lot of people from around the world and from leftist movements or interested in sort of like ecological justice would have traveled to Mexico, to Chiapas, to see what they were doing there and like find out, maybe do research on that or do interviews and those kind of things. And I think they always said, that that's good too, that's good learning, but also like look at your own home and look what's happening around you, because these projects are everywhere, like they're across the globe. It's a global story. And what I think we can do that's really powerful is show solidarity with the frontline communities in our areas. And like see how can we, like, learn from them, or amplify their voices, or see if we can get involved even in some solidarity actions. Yeah, obviously led by them, but yeah, in support, and yeah, trying to help, with those, because I mean, people in the front lines, like their lives are so much under pressure. They're really like fighting these projects. It's like an all day, every day kind of thing. Like they don't have a break, and it can be like they can face like violent repression as well. Like the communities in the Sperrins have like faced like death threats and intimidations and harassments, and yeah, physical assaults. So it's really, really tough going. So I think anything that we can do in solidarity with them is really important.
Yeah, I think people would be amazed at the things, like you said, that they find in their own backyard once they
Mhm.
start looking. Because I mean, I live in a medium-sized town in Texas at the moment, and even right outside of this town, which is an hour north of Austin, there's like strip mining happening in
Mm,
for
mhm.
like a rock quarry. But it's
Yeah.
still amazing. You think these things happen somewhere else, but it's literally right here, and there is a resistance to it from the local community, and
Mhm.
elsewhere in the US, where you wouldn't think this kind of stuff would still be going on. There's, resistance to lithium mining and, of
Totally,
course,
yeah.
the pipelines in the water. But yeah, it's just get to know your own community and kind of see, what is there. And if you don't have anything, then yeah, kind of look around you and see who you can help. But I agree, this work can be tiring, and
Mhm.
definitely need some, or people could definitely use some extra help. So.
Yeah, definitely. Mhm.
Okay, well, I guess if there's nothing else, we'll move on to our green life hack portion of the show. And this is where we just share with our listeners one thing they can do, or resource or product that might help them live more sustainably. So, would you like to start with a green life hack?
Yeah, sure. I guess like when I'm, yeah, saying this, then I always say like, yeah, try to follow what brings you joy, as well. Like I don't think it should feel like a chore. Like, I think we should definitely have fun like with this stuff as well. And for me, like it's definitely like finding out a way where you can do stuff collectively, or like in a local community near you. Or like, I mean, it can be anything, whether it's like a community garden, or like a seed swap, or if you're not into like growing stuff, like even a clothes swap, or like there's like so much that we can do to build community as well. So it's not just about um the life hack that we're doing, but like if we can do it together, I think that's really powerful, and really important as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and it helps fight this capitalist idea that we're all individuals and have to do everything on our own, and
Totally,
buy
yeah.
more so we're self-sufficient. It's like we can just help each other out.
Totally, yeah, like thinking about like repair cafes and all this kind of stuff. There's so
Yes.
many amazing things going on like all around the place. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, mine is sort of related to that. So last month we spoke with someone whose green life hack was an app that is popular in Europe, and I don't know, some parts of the U.S., that you can actually contact businesses who are giving away food for a very reduced price
Yes.
or free
So
at the end of the day when it's kind of gone off, restaurants and things like that. And so I found this website called sharewaste.com, where you can do the same things but with your like yard waste or compost materials, food waste. So I actually looked, and there are a few people in my area that collect that stuff. So like right now I'm living with others who do not compost, and I used to compost. So I would like to at least have a way to get rid of that stuff sustainably and not just throw it away. So you can collect this stuff and give it to someone who could use it for their compost bin or their chickens or something. And again, it kind of is a community activity that you can do to keep help someone else and help keep things out of landfill. So
yeah,
that is my
class.
green life hack.
Love it.
um, yeah. So where can we find you or your work online?
Yeah, so I guess I use Twitter a lot. So yeah, you can find me V'cenza Cirefice on Twitter. And as well through my like academic work, I'm part of a artist kind of research collective called Extracting Us, and we have an online exhibition up at the minute called Despite Extractivism, which kind of looks at feminist political ecology and extractivism. And I created some counter maps of the sparings based on my research. So that's the kind of idea of like making maps by and for the people in the area rather than these extractive maps, which are, by the state or corporation. So yeah, that's online at the minute, and then there's like loads of amazing contributions from people looking at these issues like all around the world. Like there's Russia, Brazil, yeah, all around the place. So I definitely recommend checking that out.
Great. And we will link to that on the show notes if you're interested in this and any of the things we've talked about on throughout the conversation. And you can find the show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, although Facebook is currently being problematic. And you can also find us on YouTube and anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You should be able to find the show and stream us, subscribe to us, share us, like us, give us 5 stars, whatever they let you do. If you have any ideas for upcoming episodes, feel free to send that our way via the website or any of the social media pages. And you can find me personally on Instagram and Twitter at Het's Gonna Be Me. Again, thank you for listening, and thank you so much for being on, V'cenza, and have a great rest of your day.
Oh, thank you.